Hello, everybody. Adam Parks here with another episode of Receivables Roundtable. Today, I am here with industry legend Rozanne Andersen, who's here to talk to me a little bit about kind of her background, her organization, but we're going to dig in talking about self-service portals and what the future of the industry looks like from an online perspective. And what an interesting perspective she has to share with us today. Rozanne, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you.
I'm thrilled to be here, Adam. Looking forward to it.
Well, I know you are a frequent speaker at conferences, a frequent webinar participant, and so pretty much everybody in our audience, I'm guessing, is already familiar with you. But for anybody who's new to the industry or joining us for the first time, could you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how you got to the seat that you're in today?
Okay, happy to do so. It is a journey, like so many careers. What you think you are going to become in terms of a profession or a job sometimes is far away from what actually happens. And so too is that situation with me. I originally, when I went to law school, I thought I'd be a litigator. I thought that I would be working in a private law firm, but it did not take long for me to realize that I really missed interacting with people. And what I found out is that the best environment for me was working within a company, within a corporation, being in-house counsel, problem solving, not just saying no, not arguing with another lawyer, and being in court as adversaries. I have really liked to problem solve. So, the path that got me to where I am today is really with that backdrop in mind as a problem solver. The very first job that I took in this industry, people might find a little bit humorous, but we had our children. I was home for a little while, and I decided I needed to get back and practice law once again. And I saw an ad that said, attorney wanted near Southdale. Well, I looked at that and I said, I'm an attorney and we live near this mall called Southdale. So I thought, perfect. What more it's just perfect. It's designed for me. Well, little did I know that when they told me it was the American Collectors Association, I did not know if we were collecting dolls, stamps, coins. I had no idea we were collecting money. But anyway, it turns out that I just took to it. I just love the industry. I particularly like the people. I liked their ingenuity, their creativity, their ambition, the fact that they were building businesses to support families. It was just something, I hate to use this phrase, but right up my alley. So everything about the industry interested me. And I began my job as an attorney at ACA, what is now known as ACA International, only to find out that they ended up sending me off to Washington, D.C. to be a lobbyist, to help influence legislation like the Fair Credit Reporting Act, the Fair Debt Collection Practices. I was actually involved in co-writing some provisions for each of those laws, as well as HIPAA. And I was just on fire. I was so excited about doing that, and doing that for an industry that I loved and was passionate about. So that just led to one job after another at ACA International. And eventually, a company called Ontario Systems reached out to me. This was shortly after the CFPB came into being. Okay. And they said, all of their clients are asking, what are you going to do with this software? How are you going to manage this software with this CFPB regulator looming over us now? So, right or wrong, the leaders of the company said, let's hire her. And she seems to know what's going on. And that was the beginning of my career at Finvi. I've been there now almost 12 years, which is hard to believe. And I've really found it fascinating. It's just a continuation of representing the industry, but I'm not in Washington, D.C. I'm in the bowels of software, if you will. I am translating statutes and code and laws and cases into meaningful solutions within our product suite. And some people would say, well, you said you really like people. I do like people, but what I'm finding is that this is, it's fascinating to me to work with developers and engineers and people like yourself. I mean, Adam, when you start to create something that is based in technology, it can, for many of us, that is just fascinating stuff.
It's my favorite thing to do. I mean, taking a business problem and then designing that solution and then building that tool and then putting it in the hands of users and realizing I was totally wrong the whole time and I have to start over again.
Right. Or right.
Yeah, or right.
You're right.
Look, I've never put out a minimum viable product, my first version of something, and not gotten significant feedback. But I also consider myself lucky. And one of the things that you said about how the people in this industry is kind of that sticky thing that's kept you here. And same thing for me. And through all of my software endeavors in the space, I get great feedback. I've got great friends around the industry. They provide me with blunt and honest feedback, and it allows me to execute and to do the best that I can. But for anybody who might not be familiar with the former Ontario Systems, now Finvi, could you tell everybody a little bit about the organization and what you guys do there?
Yes, happy to. It was a company that began probably 2 years after the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act was passed, by two individuals that were ahead of their time in terms of computer programming, etc. Ron Fackler and this Will Davis. And they built this company that grew and grew and grew in Muncie, Indiana, and they developed software that really transitioned the industry from index cards and boxes and, recording everything with a pencil and a piece of paper in terms of who should they call and who paid what, to transforming the industry into one that is really driven by technology. Mm-hmm. And that company took off. Others, filled in along the way. And by the year 2000, clearly, Ontario Systems was known as I think it's fair to say the leading provider of software for the third party industry, eventually for the debt buying industry, eventually for the healthcare receivables industry. And that's where we are today. We create software, contact management system software, the actual applications, the portals, everything that integrates within a system or an application that debt collectors need to collect debt. Okay. And to do so within this highly regulated environment that most people outside of our industry wouldn't have no idea how complex it is.
Oh my, well, no, when you bring external or exterior coders into this space, watching them go through the shock and awe. I recently, I was in India a couple months ago, and I was talking with, big groups of people, and going through the explanation of what our industry was, you could see the enlightenment. I mean, they understand the U.S. economy, but to see the enlightenment come through, I think was really interesting. Anytime that you bring somebody new into the industry and they start to get a feel for how it actually works versus how it's viewed from the outside is quite different.
Right.
Now, one of the things that, as you guys are working on, innovative technology and always kind of looking 3 or 4 steps ahead of where we're walking, right? Because software takes time to develop, design, there's a process to it. So you always have to be a forward thinker. Now the world is moving to the self-service portals. That seems to be the way of the world. There's, a whole bunch of different companies, and every payment processor seems to have portals, but it's like this ultra messy world right now with a lot of different players in the space. How do you see this going into the future? How do you see this being managed and controlled from a self-service? Everybody's either trying to build something or buy something, right? And we could have the build or buy discussion, but I'm curious as to what you see as the future of this self-service world.
Well, I feel like we are going through another transformation in terms of an industry. And I will compare it to, I live in Minnesota, so I'll kind of talk for a split second in terms of agriculture. We have farmers that are still planting in a very old-fashioned way, not with horses or anything like that. But, they're out there and they don't have the big tractors. They don't have the computerized systems to really figure out their how to plant, when to harvest, etc. I kind of feel like our industry is split like that. We've got some people that are really, really tied to the old ways.
Mm-hmm.
And even that is using a computer, but it's still old. And then there are others who are light years ahead, who are embracing what I call self-service technology for consumers.
Mm-hmm.
And self-service, all that really means is there is an invitation to a consumer, to a patient, to a constituent, depending upon what vertical you are in terms of collecting debt or buying debt. You really have
well, from a like as we look at these portals, right, and they're all going to be super specialized, right, and I think labeling it correctly, right, based on the type of debt that you're collecting and all that is incredibly important. But now we're starting to see like you've got like these different levels, right? You've got like this baseline level, which is just taking a payment. You've got this next level, which, you know, they might be able to negotiate or participate. You got another level that's got more documentation to it and
right.
all of that. Where do you think the industry is in terms of the evolution, right? And then the more advanced ones are going to have AI applications.
Yes, I think this is exactly where they are. Most of the industry still believes that they understand that there is email and text and there are solutions out there. They even understand there are websites that they can develop. But when it comes right down to it, they don't naturally connect the act of paying with the with the communication. And really, when you think about debt collection, we're not here to just visit with people. We are here to encourage and accomplish payment. Mm-hmm. And so that's why it's where I become frustrated sometimes is people are, well, I'm willing to text a person and say your payment's late or we received your payment. Well, that's great. But where we really need to bring everyone is to the fact that the consumer is able to take responsibility, go to a portal that's intuitive, that's easy to use, and actually not only communicate with the debt collector while online at any time that they so choose and at the frequency they prefer, but they can actually set up payments and do so entirely without ever talking to a person. Just
generationally,
like
that's
in
a big
every other
difference.
area of life, right?
Well, I mean, generationally, that's a massive difference, right?
Yes.
If I can't pay a bill online or if I can't book I specifically chose the salon, like the barber shop that I go to because I can book it online. I don't want to pick up the phone and call anybody.
No.
If I'm ordering food, chances are I'm going to use Uber Eats versus calling the restaurant and listening to them shout my credit card number back to me in the middle of a restaurant. So for me, like if I can do something online, I'm going to do that. I'm 40. So I know maybe I'm a little bit more advanced at that age and from a technology standpoint, but I think you've got this massive swath of consumers that don't want to talk to somebody on the phone. I mean, Absolutely. If I don't know who's calling, I'm not answering.
No, I know. That's absolutely true. And we recognize that. And I will say, obviously I work for Finvi. I'm excited about it as a company, but I will say this, it's this integration of all those, we've talked about email and text and payments. It's the integration of all of that into one system that makes it so powerful. And the reason is because it's as simple as the email system knows what the text system is doing, what the calling system is doing, what's happening to any letters, etc. And finally, it integrates with all the payment solutions, which is why we have become a company that not only sells an application, but we also sell the payment solution to go with it. We're the processor as well. So it's been just fascinating. Every time I hit certain points in my career, I think, well, I've mastered that. Maybe I've seen it all. And then the TCPA comes along. Or now I'm suddenly responsible for learning everything about card payments, debit payments, ACH payments, the US and otherwise. And so it's really, really quite fascinating. But the one thing I wanted to share, and some people, you are such a creative person, you might appreciate this. So too may some of your listeners. You used the word Uber a couple of times earlier. I really think that if you look ahead, the concept of call centers, now we already know we have call centers that really, when you visualize them, they're people at home as well as in a single location.
Yeah.
So even that visual is gone. But think about what that means. It means that you don't have to have a staff that can be in place to talk to people on a phone as your primary means of communicating with people. You do not need that. Also, I bet everyone who's been in the business 5 years, if not less, would know that the skills you need as a collector, to collect healthcare debt, it's different than collecting purchase debt. It's different than collecting credit card debt. It's different than collecting, you end up with a specialty. So here's my vision: Uber collections. And what that means is the agency, I'll say it this way: they wake up in the morning, they realize that last night 2,200,000, it doesn't matter what the number is, accounts were loaded into the system. Now, who's going to collect this? And they could be connected to an Uber Collect system, whereby the specialized agents that are certified and educated anywhere in the United States and licensed, that they can raise their hand just like Uber drivers do and say, I'm ready to work.
I'm ready to take the, and that would be awesome. I wonder if the government would ever actually allow us to reach that level of efficiency.
Well, you do wonder, but I'm sure that's what Uber said. I'm sure that's what Uber said when they were sitting back.
And they fought the government every step of the way.
Every step of the way. Remember the early days of Uber, if you did call an Uber to pick you up at an airport, where was the Uber location? It was like
outside the property.
Yeah, it was like far away.
Yeah.
That ended. And so anyway, I just do think that those kinds of thoughts, that kind of thinking is what we are at the brink of in terms of our industry.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree. And then when you think about the online portals, you're ultimately opening your shop 24/7, right? Yeah. I mean, look, some of us are night owls. I'm not a morning person by any stretch of the imagination, but you can find me at my desk at 2 a.m. more often than I'd care to admit. And that's when I have time to schedule this or pay those bills or whatever. Right. And if I can't do that in an efficient fashion, well, then it's deprioritized till the next day.
Right.
And so I think a lot of consumers are impatient. I mean, we're all impatient on some level, but like consumers are going to be impatient. They don't want to wait for something. No. And I think generationally, the communication method, and I'm curious to see how communication preferences will be carried forward. Are the banks going to get more engaged in improving the overall consumer experience by passing down information about the consumer, like about those communication preferences previously when they were performing accounts? I mean, I'd like to see more of that. I feel like we could start to see that stuff come through the industry and really improve the customer service or the customer experience aspects of what we're trying to accomplish, because the application of the technology, the application and training of the people in a more customer service oriented way. And I think we're going to see even more of that, especially as you see, for example, the credit reporting issues start to contract on some of the smaller medical agencies. They're not going to just close up shop and disappear. I mean, these people have been fighters their whole lives. Right. They're probably going to find new ways to do things, whether that be operating in a BPO format, providing customer service and customer support in other ways. And I've seen a lot of that in the last year or two. And I think it's very interesting to see how such a resilient industry continues to evolve itself, because collections is customer service, although it's maybe more aggressive customer service because the people have chosen not to be supported. But I think there's a little bit of a balance to that. And I think that the online application here is big. I've never been a big fan of the mobile app though. And for two reasons. One, I mean, third-party disclosure, but I don't see a consumer wanting to download an app and have an app on their phone and do that, because a web app operates at the same level. So doing those things through a cloud-based web app, they can accomplish the same things. It doesn't need to be local on their device. And that's an argument I've had with many providers through the years.
Well, and plus, if you're a consumer in the situation where you may be going through a rough time, it's not as though you only owe one. Probably owe more than one debt. Let's put it that way. So what are you going to, and if several collectors are collecting, or if several creditors are, what are you going to do? Download 10 apps on your phone? No.
That's the expectation, apparently. I mean,
Yeah, and
but I think
that's
that the
not gonna happen.
technology available has increased exponentially. And I think if you go and you look 5, 10 years ago at the very simple forms, that was at best what you were getting. Now we've got authentications into, validated information, the ability to exchange or retrieve documentation. One of the biggest is we evaluated Google reviews and complaints across the entire industry for a number of years. One of the things that we saw that has all but disappeared is they won't send me a receipt, or I never got the receipt, or like you would always see these complaints or these reviews that were about receipts, and you don't really see that anymore. And I think that part of that is because it's available to them now. They can log in, they
Right.
can authenticate themselves with
Sure
information
got
that they already know if the collection
right.
agency is doing it right. I mean, you still have some that want them to go find some reference number under a rock in the park, but most
Right.
of them can do it off of something that they already know.
Right.
And
Right.
I think that's an important factor as we look at how those things are developed and built.
I do too. If you think about how I've responded to your questions, I mean, we have talked about self-service and that is really taking hold in our industry. And I shared my vision of Uber collections. The other topic I was hoping to share just a little bit, and you touched on it a bit, with self-service comes authentication of the consumer.
Please.
And I think a lot of people they throw around MFA, multi-factor authentication, single sign-on, two-factor authentication. They throw more things around than, but the bottom line is we're going through a transition there as well. Mm-hmm. And what we're seeing right now, this is where I'm spending an awful lot of my time right now. And I think people should be aware of it, not to know what I'm doing, but to be aware of what's coming.
Sure.
It is the requirement for our industry that we engage and we adopt multi-factor authentication, which means when entering any system, when any individual enters any system, any database, any application that has customer and consumer data. Mm-hmm. So it's not talking about system to system, but people entering a system.
People touching it, yeah.
Service providers, consultants, employees, you name it. They all have to enter your system, so to speak, using multi-factor authentication, which is one piece of something people know, like a user ID and password. That would be something a tool such as a USB type of
physical key,
and the third one could be an inherent trait such as a fingerprint or retinal imaging, something like that. So you need two. You need something they know and one of the other two.
Yeah,
and that is really coming on fast. The first deadline is June of 2023 for financial institutions, including debt collectors. And that's one thing that I think people, if they're not aware of, they should be, I don't think people should be losing sleep, but they should be all over that issue.
When you talk about two-factor authentication, you mentioned a couple of the methods. The biometric is tough at best, especially if you've ever burned your hand. I've been through that before, and the retina scanners are not always accurate. So I've been through that before too.
Okay.
But here's my question for you: is one thing that I've seen, and this it's a push I've definitely seen in the crypto space, but people moving away from the cell phone as a two-factor authentication tool and moving to, they can still use their cell phone, but they're not using the SMS messaging for the phone. They're using an authenticator like Google Authenticator or one of these random number generators. And as I look at I'm curious to hear your thoughts. My gut tells me from what you're saying that those authenticators would probably be the best option overall for debt collectors and groups like that to deploy multi-factor authentication without increasing the burden exponentially, because you can't
wholeheartedly agree.
But here
for
comes
a couple of reasons, not the least of which, when you talk about think about the people accessing their applications and their software and their databases, etc. Yes, I do think like the Google solution's better because the rules say you have to have anti-phishing tools, tools that are not ripe for hacking and misuse. phishing. And so when it comes to your employees and the users, et cetera, you do have to have anti-phishing multi-factor authentication, which would mean email and text doesn't cut it.
So one other challenge that makes me curious here is even if you wanted to use a two-factor authentication, like Authenticator, like Google Authenticate, how do you do that when only the executives can have their phones in the building? Right? When you've got these banks of lockers holding collector phones.
Right. Well, that is why that is actually why there are actual software applications that can facilitate that, so that it does serve as a tool as opposed to just another how would you say, just another piece of information that you know. So Google has developed it. We've got something called SAML. There's several different sign-on devices, and they are not impossible, not difficult to use, but they are, we're not going to avoid the expense, but everyone knows debt collector agents do not have their phones, and SMS and emailing them anything is it's not phishing resistant. It's also not an accessible.
It's not going to work. Yeah,
it's not going to work in our industry because nobody has that. So there are other sources, and even the own internal phone system can be of help as well.
True. True, because then you can lock that down to individual extensions.
Right.
That's See, and that's why you're a problem solver, because you identify these problems that are coming up from a statutory standpoint, and then have to find interesting ways of creating operational solutions that work in such a unique environment. Because solving problems in the arm industry is like trying to do a Rubik's Cube underwater with both hands tied behind your back.
Really, it is. It is a very difficult industry to work within. So
we're incredibly unique, Rozanne, and I can't thank you enough for coming on and chatting with me today. I really appreciate you coming on. I hope that as we get a little closer to the two-factor authentication requirements coming into play, maybe we can jump back on another session and have a deeper discussion and talk about that some more. For those of you that are watching today, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, you can leave those in the comments below here on LinkedIn or YouTube. I'm sure Rozanne and I will be happy to respond to those. If you have additional topics that you'd like to see us discuss, you can leave those in the comments below as well. But Rozanne, again, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate your time, your energy, and your expertise.
Well, thank you, Adam. It was a pleasure.
Thank you again, and we'll see everybody again soon.